Well, good evening, everyone. It's great that you're interested in what's going on in Ukraine. I'm pretty much obsessive with it. I've been following it since the beginning of January, when the State Department started sending out press releases that Ukraine was building up, Russia was building up military all around the borders of Ukraine. I do have a nice map here just to, I mean, one thing I do whenever I find anything's going on, I immediately look for a map just so that I can understand what's going on. And so here's there's a map of Europe, which, how do I do this? Okay, let's see if I can get the map. So I just need to share the screen. Okay, here we are. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Now you can see here, here's Ukraine here, and here's Russia. Now, what was interesting to me was the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov. In 2014, Russia came here and took off and occupied and annexed Crimea, which is this great big blob here hanging out in the Black Sea. Now, I'm very interested in Crimea because that's what made Florence Nightingale's name. The Battle of the Crimean War in 1854, I think. So she had a hospital in Istanbul. So what they were doing was they were taking patients, wounded soldiers from Crimea to Istanbul, which I've never really understood. And I've never really understood why Britain was fighting Russia in 1854, but Britain does things like that. They have all kinds of weird wars. So anyway, in early January, Russia was building up military all the way around the border. So all the way, you can see there's a rather big border with Russia. There's been, ever since 2014, when Crimea was taken by the Russians, there were two areas here in the east that became separatist, and so there's been a war going on ever since then. Ukraine has been at war since 2014. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting was before then there was all kinds of division in Ukraine, but Putin has managed to unify Ukraine like no one else could. And out of all this, everything that was going on, they elected a president in 2014. I think his name's Posipov, something like that. He was defeated in 2019 by President Zelensky in 2019, when President Zelensky got over 70% of the vote. So this is Kyiv, which is the capital, and this is the area that's under great threat at the moment. So here we are then. We've got the Russian army all the way around the Russian border, and then also in around Belarus here. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania are not under the control of Russia. So this is where all the refugees are going now. Now, Moldova was interesting because I understood the Russian military also had a buildup in Moldova, but apparently that was not substantial. Belarus and Moldova are falling apart at the moment, but I'll get to that in a bit. So there we are. We had military build up all the way around the borders and in Belarus. Belarus is part of the Russian Federation. Now, there was the USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, which fell apart in 1991. But in the last few years, I don't remember when it happened, Belarus decided they wanted to be part of Russia again. And so they sort of are. So they, anyway, they're having a lot of problems at the moment. So then not only, but you can see what happened. Crimea, the fact that Russia had Crimea meant that you could not get to Ukraine by sea because they were blocked off. And they couldn't go through the Sea of Azov either, because of Crimea and Russia. So it was, I remember looking at this map and thinking, my goodness. And we were hearing in January from the State Department, there are 90,000, there's 100,000, there's 200,000 troops all the way around. You know, Putin is getting ready. He's in battle positions. He's sending in blood. He's sending in portable crematoriums, crematoria. Very clear what was happening. And then on the 28th, 27th, oh, yeah. 24th. When was it? 24th. 24th of February, they started bombing. And that's when the war started. So that is essentially what's going on. Odessa is at great risk at the moment. Kharkiv has fallen, but they'll probably get it back. Lviv this is where people are escaping to. Now, at the moment, I heard there's 1.5 million refugees that have gone to these friendly countries. But the State Department in January and February was saying that they were expecting 5 million refugees, which is pretty awful. Now here, this is interesting, Turkey. Now there's a bridge, a land bridge from Asia to Europe. And I know this personally because once I took a plane to Istanbul and I landed in Asia instead of Europe. And I had to go over the bridge at 2 o'clock in the morning to get to Europe. That was quite something. You know, that's more than an era over a time. That was a pretty good era, but it was really quite amazing. So there's a bridge over here. And what was interesting very early on, I think on around February 24th, exactly when the war started, Turkey agreed to block off this area, the Bosphorus, blocked off blocked Russian boats from going through the straits, which was very significant. What was interesting too is how the rest of the world pretty much has united with Ukraine, which is very interesting. But Ukraine has a very compelling argument. They're saying we are fighting democracy. If we fall, the rest of Europe will fall too. Now here we have Belarus, and we're hearing about Belarus providing, sorry?
Belarus fell a long time ago.
Yes, but what's interesting is there was an election in November, and this woman won the election, and Lukashenko decided he didn't want to do that, and Lukashenko is still in control. And the lady, I think her name's something like Svetlana or something, she's gone somewhere else, and she's like the Belarus president in exile. Meanwhile, there's an enormous number of volunteers from Belarus who are actually joining with Ukraine. So it sounds like Belarus is going to fall apart fairly soon. Moldova is interesting too. The president there is very supportive of Ukraine, and they're starting to take in refugees. There's a lady president there too. But they've also had some problems too, because Moldova was expected to be part of Putin's influence, and it's not. So that's now. Because I always want to know what is going, I'm trained in physiology and biochemistry. I always want to know what happened. How did this tin pot country called Russia get to own all these countries after the Second World War? And why does Putin think he has the right to all these countries? And if you listen to his talks, that's what he'll say. He'll say, well, you know, Ukraine isn't a country. There's no one there. It's like when Captain Cook arrived in Australia and looked around at the Aborigines who were being peaceful and curious. He looked around at the Aborigines and said, there's no one here, and stuck a flag in and said, this land is nulla terrace, something like that. And it belongs to England. And that's exactly what Putin has done to Ukraine. He doesn't acknowledge this there's actually anyone there. Now, Russia has a population of around 145 million, which is around the population of Nigeria. It's about 40% the population of the United States. Now, Russia goes across 11 time zones, and it's also the biggest country in the world. So it's also the biggest country in Europe and Asia. Well, when you're the biggest country. Ukraine, you can see, is the second biggest country in Europe. But also, what I also learned, it actually is the poorest country in Europe. And that's something I didn't really understand until I started reading some things that President Zelensky said. There was massive theft of resources and cash, money that should have been going to the government and the people just went into the pockets of zillionaires. There really was an enormous amount of corruption in Ukraine, which I believe stopped in about 2014. I don't know if you remember pictures of Ukrainians going into the palace of the former president that was ousted in 2014. It was pretty spectacular. And that's the case in Nigeria. It's the case in other countries where all the money just stays in the top. The people at the top, they negotiate all the contracts and they keep it all for themselves. So, but that's, okay, that's that. Now let's get to my other, here we are. Here's a map of Ukraine all by itself. You can see this, okay, and where are we at the moment? Kyiv is under threat at the moment. Now here's Chernobyl. Now what's interesting is and this is the biggest power plant in the world, nuclear power plant in the world, Zaporizhzhia. I need to learn how to pronounce all this stuff. Now I was in Germany in 1986 where Chernobyl, when Chernobyl melted down. In fact, it was the day I met my late husband, father of my two younger children. So that was kind of interesting. But there are, I understand there's 10 nuclear power plants around Ukraine, but 4 of them are substantial, and I'm not quite sure which are the other 2. So there's certainly this one, which is the biggest one. And the problem last week is that the Russians were firing missiles at it. Okay, let's unshare screen. How do I do that? Okay, here we are. Now I wanted to find out why Stalin was given Eastern Europe. So I went back and I discovered that, and I knew that in the build-up to World War II, one of the reasons Hitler was so successful was because Nazi Germany was able to train and do all the military stuff with great help from Soviet Russia.
Yep.
Which is surprising when you think about it, because of course the Soviets were communists and the Nazis were very anti-communist. I mean, they were killing communists. So that's something it's interesting. There's so much I don't understand, but I guess it all goes down to money. There must have been money involved. Someone was getting rich off it. So by 1940, 1941, no, 1940, the Soviets wanted to have a pact with Germany, and they had all these demands, and Germany wouldn't, and the demands were just to give them a few more countries, and the Germans wouldn't do it. So the Germans instead decided to invade Russia. So then Russia turned around to the Allies and said, okay, and had a series of meetings. I mean, the 1945 one in February 1945 in Yalta, that seems to have been the important one, where Stalin and FDR and Churchill met in Yalta, and Stalin was essentially given Eastern Europe. Now, by February 1945, the Battle of the Bulge was underway. I mean, it was just, they were winding down. Victory in Europe Day was May 8th, 1945, so 3 months later. Now, so that was in February 1945 in Yalta. 2 months later, FDR died. Very likely he was already pretty ill in Yalta. And then 5 months later, Churchill, in July of 1945, Churchill was defeated in the elections. So he didn't even have the support of British people. But meanwhile, they'd given Eastern Europe over to the Russians. Now, if you know anything about what happened in Berlin after the Russians liberated Berlin, the Russians were awful. They were raping women, killing people, doing all sorts of things. And the British soldiers and the American soldiers were not doing this. I mean, probably, there were some who were psychopaths, but this was not something that they were doing. Russia used rape as a weapon of war. And I was hearing today, this has actually started in Ukraine. A few of these cases have already been reported of women. I don't know if they're young, women being raped by Russian soldiers. So I don't know. So that's the history. Then of course, 1945, I went, the only time I went behind the Iron Curtain before it dropped was in 1980 when I went to Hungary and to Budapest. And I saw bullet holes in walls from the 1956 uprising against the Soviets in Budapest. Awful. I mean, they were there. You could see them, and there were tanks in all in the squares. The Russian military presence was very much visible in 1980. In Budapest. And then after that, I went by train through Yugoslavia, as it was, all the way to Greece. And yeah, boy, that was, people were having their cameras confiscated and in Yugoslavia. So it seems to me that anyone who lived under Russia, under the Soviets, does not want to do that again. And I think that is the core of what's going on in Ukraine. It's only been 30 years since they stopped being part of the Soviet Union, and they do not want to be part of the Soviet Union again. And, it's very clear. They'd rather die than be part of the Soviet Union. So that's my take on the history. Anyone got anything to add? Did I get anything right? Anything wrong?
I didn't see anything wrong.
Okay. Now, I've been following a whole lot of people on Twitter And what's interesting about Twitter is who's on it. I mean, there are direct posts from President Zelensky, pretty much several every day. There's also from the Ukraine military. There's also an enormous number of Ukrainian journalists who are reporting. What I'm seeing as the best Ukraine journalist is Ukraine newspaper it's called Kyiv Independent. And you can actually, I'm going to do this, you can actually support them through Patreon, say like $5 a month sort of thing. So that's one way you can actually help people there. They have these war journalists, I mean, they're crazy. They're the bravest people on the planet. I mean, it's just astonishing. And a lot of them don't survive because it's very dangerous what they're doing. So the Kyiv Independent has its journalists all throughout Ukraine, and they're providing information. Now, today, President Zelensky announced that they're going into a war economy throughout Ukraine, and they're starting to clamp down on people making videos because they could be giving away information that they don't want Russia to have. Which makes sense. I know from World War II history that it was loose lips sink ships. My parents met in London in 1944 when missiles were being lobbed from France onto London. And they were in their 20s when that was going on. And my grandparents were in their 20s when London was England, Britain, when Britain was at war in the First World War. And yeah. So what can we do? Send some money to Kyiv Independent through Patreon. Another thing people are suggesting is to go to Airbnb and booking.com and book a stay in some rooms, and don't go there, and just explain to when you book it, explain to the host that you're not planning on going there. It's just a way of contributing money. So that's putting money directly into people's hands. And that's one thing that is needed. The banking system is working in Ukraine. It's not like in Russia, which is all closed down. But Ukraine is, I heard, it's the breadbasket of Europe. It's something like 20 to 40% of the wheat supply of Europe. So I guess the bread must be pretty amazing. Gosh. But they're not able to sow at the moment because of, how, of course they can't. So it'll be a problem with the harvest this year. Another way to donate money, the Ukrainian government has on their website some places where they are asking you to donate. The International Rescue, IRC, International Rescue Fund, whatever it's called. Mm. UNICEF is also accepting money. Another way to put money directly into the hands of women, and remember, the men are all fighting, and a lot of the men aren't even at home, they're somewhere else, because every male between the age of 18 and 60 has been conscripted. And what's happened is that a lot of Ukrainian men who are actually out of the country are actually coming back to fight. So the people who are leaving are the women with children and old people. A lot of the women are also joining the military as well and learning how to fight and throw Molotov cocktails. So, I mean, it certainly isn't that all the women have left. Not at all. But another way to give money is to go to Etsy, ETSY. And a lot of the vendors in Kyiv have digital things that you can download, like patterns and one thing or another. So you can send money that way too. I'm seeing that there's independent media has totally been closed down in Moscow. There were two main radio stations, Moscow Echo, and there was another one. They've been closed. Oh, maybe it was a television station, but they've been closed down. Facebook has been closed down. Twitter's been closed down. But there are ways you can get to the Russian people. There's plenty of resistance going on in Russia. And everyone resisting seems to be getting arrested. There were 3,000 people arrested across Russia today, last time I saw, and it's possibly more. But a lot of the problem in Russia is that the Russian people do not believe that anything's happening in Ukraine. And this has been a problem with the soldiers. Like, the soldiers are showing up in Ukraine. They were told that they were getting rid of neo-Nazis from Ukraine, and the Ukraine people would welcome them with open arms. And of course, that's not what happened. So the Russian soldiers are very confused. It's like, what's going on? This isn't what we were told. But that official story is still being told across Russia, that it's not a war. It's just going in and helping people that need their help. So one way to get through this misinformation is to go to restaurant reviews, which apparently are you can still say things on restaurant reviews, and you just, instead of saying something about the restaurant, you say something about what's going on in Ukraine. The idea is that if enough people hear about it from enough places, they'll start believing it, you know? So because people in Ukraine who have relatives in Russia, and they're talking, there's no problems talking on the phone. But they're talking on the phone and the Russian relatives are not believing it. Well, no, we saw that in this country with MAGA relatives. I don't have any MAGA relatives, but plenty of people do. And what I've been hearing is it's pretty awful. I've certainly known people who were MAGA, and I don't talk to them anymore, which is probably just for my sanity. Not that that's working, but that's the same thing that's going on in Russia. They're just not believing, because they're getting all this information that the Ukrainians like what's going on, and there's no problem, and you know, Russia's the savior. So, anything else? Any other idea? I want to say that I've yes, rescue.org, IRC site. Oh, that's good. Yeah. No, that's good. So, no, I've been talking with a friend in Sussex who visited us at Arch Street a few years ago. And she's very much interested in women's rights. And so I follow her on Twitter and we chat back and forth. Her name's Claire, and the Queen of England gave her an MBE for her good work, which is kind of cool. Anyway, Claire tells me she is interested in principle on the idea of getting a truck and with Quakers going to, filling a truck full of supplies and going to help. Now, this is what happened in 1917. That's what essentially what Henry Cadbury and Rufus Jones did. They filled up, I don't know, ships, containers, I don't know, but they fed like 1 million kids in a very short time from 1917, and it went well into the 1920s. And then they started doing it again in the 1930s. You know, and I wrote about this in my Wednesday newsletter. And then in 1946, the British Quakers and the American Friends Service Committee won a Nobel Prize for the fabulous work that they did, feeding people. And I'm wondering if we could somehow get people interested in doing the same thing. You know, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard. I mean, during the Second World War, American Quakers were packing things and sending things, and, you know, they were doing this. They were feeding people. Now, at the moment, hostilities are still going on, but at some stage they're going to stop. And one thing we do know from everything we've heard is that this situation in Ukraine, which, remember, was the poorest country in Europe, it's going to be dire. I mean, they're not growing wheat this year. They're going to need food. And I like the idea of being able to, of somehow organizing something in about September. And maybe someone going there, driving, someone, I mean, I want to go. Not that I can drive. Yeah, well, I probably could. But just getting, I'm sure that if someone really was interested in going, like this lady from Britain, I'm sure there'd be an enormous amount of support for them. Fill a truck, go feed people, fill up a container. I mean, I imagine at some stage they're going to be able to get through to the Black Sea again, because the Russian boats won't be a problem anymore. And then I guess the port is Odessa, which of course at the moment is under fire. So I don't know. I mean, how else? I've just given you a couple of ideas how to help. What else can we do? How can we help them?
I was wondering if the Quaker community, the larger Quaker community, has anything come out from, say, the yearly meeting or AFSC?
No, they're all doing things like sending letters saying we're holding in the light and everyone should stop shooting each other, which is not helpful. I'm not seeing anything real coming out of this. I mean, I think it's a good thing holding them in the light. I mean, I'm doing that. I'm hoping we're all doing that. But as far as feeding children and helping in some way, I don't see it. And I think we need to, one way or another. So I don't know. I mean, I hope people will watch this video. I mean, I didn't give you much notice. I'm hoping people will watch the video and be inspired. I'd like to know what people are doing and what they can do. I know Germany very well. I spend a lot of time there. My younger two children are German citizens. If I could get them to, my oldest son speaks some Polish because my older two children are half Polish. So if I could get them to come along, I think it'd be great, or go instead of me. I think it would be great. But and that's essentially what we need. People who can speak some of those Eastern European languages and be helpful. The problem is, you know, it's interesting. I went to Haiti after the earthquake in 2010. I went a month later, and I went with the Bedford-Stuyvesant Volunteer Ambulance Association. And I was pretty useless. I mean, I was taking photographs and writing stories and things, but that was pretty, I mean, I was running around getting things for the nurses. I mean, that's pretty much all I was doing. But for the Haiti thing, I mean, people were only going for 5 days, which is useless. You know, I mean, you still got jet lag after 5 days. I mean, you've got to go there for like 3 months or something at least until you sort of understand what's going on. And then when someone comes to take over from you, you can tell them what's going on. You know, you can't treat it like a vacation. You've really got to understand what's going on and working on it. You know. Yeah.
Susanna, I think that your information is really helpful to us. You mentioned that the Kiev Independent, and you said you can support them through, and I didn't understand where we could support.
Patreon. Okay. You know, I have started putting together an information sheet. I will send that to you with all that information.
Thank you. That would be helpful, because we have a friend who actually he lived below us in an apartment, and he was from Ukraine, and we did write to him to ask how we could help, but we haven't heard back. So
let us know when you do hear back. I mean, this is the thing, the personal connections are just so important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Because you know, when you're giving to someone you know they're a real person and they're not some Russian scammer. And I can tell you the Russian scammers will be big. I mean, this is one thing I found out from, you know, working in Africa and various other places, is that everyone is very good at taking away your money. And often the people who need it most are not the people that get it. I mean, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You also mentioned Airbnb. Will that be on the list too? Because I'm thinking you mean just an Airbnb in Ukraine, but are there any special places in Ukraine we should try to do that, rent some rooms that we won't use?
Everywhere.
Everywhere? Oh, okay.
Everywhere.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
the whole country is under threat. I mean, there's not just one front. Now you have to remember from the map that I showed you, look what the Russians did. They came from the north, they came from the east, they came from the south.
Right.
The west, they've got this friendly countries in the west. So I mean, that's all anyone could do was just go to the west. So all of those areas are in trouble. And you could see too from the map of Ukraine, there's water like all the way. It's like Ukraine is in two parts. Split with a river. Oh, one thing I didn't say is apparently Ukraine is a lot older than Russia, and this Kiev apparently was like settled and had a church like 700 years before Moscow, and the Ukrainians are very keen to tell you that. But that's another problem too. There's all these historic sites that are being blown up, and that's what's so awful. I mean, the president of Ukraine, he was an actor before he became president. But he starred in a series called Servant of the People. And that was also, I'll give you the link, and that's in the information sheet too. But it's on YouTube. And what's interesting about the 3 episodes that are on YouTube, it's just how gorgeous Kiev it was. It looks like Budapest or one of these old European cities. Beautiful old city. I was surprised at that, but it really was. Ukraine is a very beautiful place. I mean, I guess if you're growing all that wheat, it's got to have very fertile land. And that's the thing, it's all flat apart from the Carpathian Mountains. And I haven't quite figured out where the Carpathian Mountains are. Are they on the west? I'm not sure. Maybe, yeah, they're on the west. Okay. Okay. So, but that's, so any other ideas?
Well, one thing I was thinking of is the Ukrainian community here in Philadelphia. And I'm surprised that the Inquirer hasn't done more to kind of shed light on what that community is thinking and perhaps even doing. But it's a pretty vital community.
You know, I went to a vigil that they had last week. And also I did try to contact them, but I think they're just incredibly busy. And they're probably, you know, everyone's contacting them at once. And they're trying to figure out what's happening with their relatives. I mean, how can they get anything into them? You know, unless they get it through, I don't even know if the mail, I mean, how can the mails be working if you're being bombed? So I'm not even sure what's working there at the moment. I do know that volunteers are going and they're giving medical and food at the borders, mostly in Poland, because Poland has the biggest border with Ukraine. But yeah, the Ukrainian community, absolutely. We can't do anything without making sure that it's working for the Ukrainians. I mean, that's the basic of being a Quaker. You don't show up and say, well, what you need is, you know, you go and you say, how can we help? What can we do that's helpful to you? And that's, yeah. I'll try again. I'll try and call them and see if anyone is answering. They're certainly not settling down because it's just awful. You know, I'm reading these things on Twitter of these people who have been posting since the beginning of the war, and they're all exhausted. They're absolutely exhausted. And you know, apart from everything else. Yeah, it's a terrible situation. You know, it's interesting. I learned a new word yesterday, whataboutism. And I was watching an interview of Vladimir Putin with Megyn Kelly. And he gave some ridiculous answer to something. She said, well, that's whataboutism. And I thought, whoa, that's an interesting word. I don't know. So whataboutism is when you are when you're criticizing something and they answer back and they say, and they deflect and they say, yeah, but, you know, my cat is sick. You know, it's your fault. That's it. And it's your fault. You made my cat sick. Right. So that's it. You're saying, I noticed your dog has a problem. And they'll answer, yeah, but why did you make your cat sick? And that's apparently this is a technique that has been perfected by Putin. And this is a MAGA technique too. And
Yes,
that's something
definitely.
that's something I hadn't realized. Now that I'm understanding it, I think I can sort of handle it better, because a lot of it is being able to respond to people in ways that, you know, that are kind, but on the other hand, you know, you don't want to put up with bullies. But that's the thing. I think calling for Ukraine to put down their arms is to not understand what the situation is. I think that's outrageous. That's like telling the Jews in Nazi Germany, stop fighting the Germans. They won't put down their arms until you're putting them arms. It's like, what arms? You know, what are you talking about? And so I get pretty upset when I see people saying, well, stop the war. We want Putin and Ukraine to negotiate. Putin will not negotiate. He wants, that's not happening. That's what the State Department tried to do all of January and all of February. They tried so hard. You know, but once everyone started firing, you've got to figure out ways of not getting people killed. And sometimes it involves people firing back, which I think is awful. I couldn't do it. And I'm very upset that anyone's doing that. But I don't see a choice. You know, I mean, you can put up barricades, you can do all kinds of things. I wish they had more fighter jets so that they could take out, well, I don't know. I don't like them dropping bombs on people either. I mean, I'd like the Russian soldiers to get out of their tanks so that the Ukrainians could bomb the tanks. That would be nice, just so that, you know, just get rid of the weapons. But, you know, it's what's happening, and it's very, very distressing. So if you have any more ideas, that would be great.
Thank you
Anything
very
else?
much.
You're very welcome. Okay, is that it?
Here.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much, Susanna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to meet you, Liz. I hope we meet you again soon.
Oh, I think you will.
Good.
Thank you. I
Thank
hope to meet you too. I'm so impressed by all you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, stop the recording.